After all of this playing the field for years, until it was 1978 when the Joffrey offered me a full-time job in New York. And I had always said I wouldn't move to New York unless I had a job. So I wasn't going to move to New York looking for work. And so after some weighing of the odds, I decided I'd do it and took another road tour with the Joffrey, but when it was over I would be based in New York, not in Boston any longer. And basically said to Ed, okay, I've got to go, I'm going, are you going to come too?
And I interpreted that as the ultimatum, I think. We've been playing being lovers for several years. And this was a potential permanent split. Les was going to New York. I was just finishing up nursing school. It would be an ideal time for us to do something together. Or I could stay in Boston and pursue my nursing career there. So I interpreted this as, I guess maybe we were ready, you know. So were we ready or not? And was I ready or not? Had I stopped running away enough? He was making the invitation, which meant not necessarily that he wanted to stay together forever, but he wanted me to go with him. So what was I going to do? And so I worried about that for a little bit and ultimately determined that Les was my best chance of happiness. That he could he's a very stable person.
Or used to be.
He has a really good work ethic. He's a very centered, smart man. He knew where he was going, or he certainly had a real drive and a really good sense of himself. And I had lots of dreams and desires, and it's not as if I, was floating around without purpose, but I really, at that point, knew that my best chance of having a good life was with him. So I made this decision, and I got in the car and I drove from Boston to Burlington, Vermont, where Les was with one of the dance companies. And I didn't tell him I was coming. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, I knocked on his motel room door. And, he was with young dancers, so I imagine he assumed it was a dancer. No, you didn't know I was coming.
No, I didn't know you were coming, but the dancers had been having an ice fight in the hall that night, so I thought it was the manager of the hotel coming to complain to me about the dancers.
Right. So he opened the door to the motel room, and I said, okay, I'll go to New York. But only for 2 years.
For 2 years, you said. Only for 2 years.
And that's our anniversary date, which is April 14th. So that's when we date our more significant commitment to each other. And so now it's been over 26 years.
Yeah. And we moved that summer to New York. And friends at the Joffrey and the Joffrey artistic directors helped us get settled and helped us get apartments and helped us find a place to stay, the second company. and we were there. Ed working in first psychiatric nursing units, me working with the Joffrey, and it ended. The 2 years stretched to
15
or 16 years. It was 1993 by the time we left New York, and we moved there in '78. And along the way, we had each changed jobs, and we had each done a couple of other things, and but always remained gainfully employed, amazingly, in New York, and it was very good. It was a good time. But by the time we left, the relationship also kind of changed, because both of the places that we worked, Ed began working with nursing homes, and the AIDS epidemic broke in the early 1980s. And where I was working at the Joffrey, one of my coworkers was one of the first people diagnosed with AIDS. Of course, they didn't call it AIDS then. And because Ed was working in nursing homes, as time wore on, he began dealing with a lot of AIDS patients. So both our personal friends and our places of employment became centered kind of around the AIDS epidemic. And that continued from mid-'80s on until by the time we decided to leave New York, it was, we buried a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And we just felt the need that we were burned out and had to get out of the city. And that was when we decided to come to the country. Although we had been, because of the traveling, we'd always vacationed at inns and B&Bs because they were kind of secluded and it was more difficult to reach us and that sort of thing. So that was kind of how we decided to move to the country and become innkeepers. And after research, we moved in 1993 to New Hampshire, which was kind of a throwback to both of our childhoods because we grew up in the country, both of us. Me in rural Indiana, Ed in rural upstate New York. And meeting the people here in New Hampshire was a little bit like meeting some of the people that we grew up with. The characters were the same, the relationships are similar, the expectations of neighbors. And what we found that was amazing was here we were coming out of a totally urban environment where we were integrated as a couple and recognized as a couple. Both of our places of employment knew us as a couple. And we moved here as partners buying a business, and the community very quickly accepted us as a couple in rural New Hampshire. And we really have not had any kind of direct confrontational moments since moving to New Hampshire 11 years ago. So our evolution as a couple and our coming out publicly, there was never a moment. It would just always seem to happen, and it always seemed to be relatively comfortable. And whether it was because we were comfortable with our relationship or because we continued to surround ourselves or insulate ourselves by an extended family of people who had no problem with that, it seemed to just encourage the... certainly there was never a time in that period where we felt there was a pressure or a movement to break us apart or to within the group, you know. So our relationship as a couple was easy for it to just go the way couples do, and you kind of work out your problems and have good times and bad times and live your life.